Hi, everyone, and welcome to the US edition of our Conscious Consumptions event. I am Thomas, and I will be your host today. And it's great to welcome you all. And I trust Joeri will serve you with a great portion of insights and actionable, fresh thinking today. Let me start with a few practicalities before we dive in. First of all, this session will be recorded, and you will receive a recording afterwards. If you have any questions during the event, feel free to type them out in the questions pane on the right, just while the presentation is going, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the event where we will tackle those questions. After the recording in the coming days, you will receive the recording and also an overview of the Q&A with the questions and the answers. Before we get started, some facts and figures about InSites Consulting. So we are a next generation insight agency with a global footprint, and you can see our locations on the map here. We have over 600 people spread across 22 locations. And our mission is to empower people to shape the future of brands. And as today's presentation will show, that future will become increasingly more sustainable. And on the next slide, we have a nice selection of the brands we currently are shaping the future with. Many of these are here today and even more. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker today. This is Joeri. Joeri is one of the co-founders of InSites Consulting and our next-gen and sustainability expert. Not an export. The floor is yours, Joeri.
Thank you, Thomas. Well, it would be a good idea to export me, actually. Thanks. Thank you. It's an honor, actually, to be introduced by the Researcher of the Year, Quirk's just new awarded Researcher of the Year, Thomas, of which we are very proud of course. So welcome to today's edition of the very, very recent study we did on sustainability in the US. We actually did the field in October and November this year, so just a couple of weeks ago. And I'm happy to share some of the insights with you. To make the following 1 hour and a half, a bit more interactive, even from a distance, I'm using this tool that you can scan with your camera app on your phone. And it should normally lead you to the URL you see on the bottom side of the slide, polev.com. It's not for electric vehicle, but for everywhere, polev.com/Joeri. But if you scan the QR code, you should normally come to this screen where you can participate in an interactive survey we will be having. On every time you will see on top of the slide also this code in case you were a bit too late to scan the right URL, or if you lose the URL. So we'll come back to this poll later on. Just try it out for the moment and we'll see. And I hope that it works. Now, one of the things what we notice when we study trends and when we study consumers, including US consumers, is that there is an increased anxiety when it comes to the environment. We call it the eco-anxiety. It's not just us calling it that way. It's actually something that recently psychologists have noticed, that there is an increasing amount of people that suffer. It's not yet a mental disorder, but they suffer from high levels of stress over climate change, including symptoms like losing sleep, losing appetite, but also panic attacks, obsessive thinking, because they feel frustrated that they cannot do something about how the climate is changing. And of course, some recent extreme weather events, whether it's the extreme high temperatures we had in North America last summer, or floods in certain parts of the world, they are also increasing the anxiety we have when it comes to climate change. One of the, I skipped one stat already of the study. What we saw in our US figures is that almost 6 out of 10 of Americans are saying that the government is not doing enough to limit climate change. Of course, I know it's not just the government who has an impact on the climate change, but the frustration is often linked to leadership and how they're dealing with climate change. One of the other trends, we could call it, we see is what we call eco-dinks, and I'm sure as a marketer you're familiar with the abbreviation or the acronym DINKS, double income no kids. Eco-dinks are those who decide not to have children because of ecological reasons, because of climate change. And it's actually, when you look at the US birth rates, as you can see, they're declining fastly. And if we look into research results, we see that 1/3 of people who decide not to have children at all claim that the reason they do it is because they're a bit afraid that climate change will have a negative impact on the lives of their children, or even a step further, they see it as a less ecological thing to do, giving birth to children. And that's actually proven, as you can see on the below side of this slide, because the Lund University in Sweden, they have figured out that if every US family had one child less, it would save more CO2 emissions per year than becoming a vegan or driving an electric car. So of course, it's a bit short-term thinking, because if we stop procreating, then of course, perhaps the planet will be better, but there won't be any humans left. But it's a good example of how this eco-anxiety and eco-worrying is evolving a lot. And what we increasingly see is that we're not only eco-warriors, but also eco-warriors in protests, for instance. And it's often the young generation. Those of you who know me, it's one of my other passions. It's young generations, Generation Z or Generation Y. It's often those that are very committed in protesting and skipping school as well. For instance, we had the global climate strikes in 2019. Then, of course, we had COVID, but then after COVID, we again have these strikes and protests at the White House in Washington before the recent climate summit we had in Glasgow. All actually a bit driven by one figure, you could say, Greta Thunberg, but also driven by this young generation who want to make the world greater again, or greater again, you could call it. Brands are tapping into this as well, especially those who are involved with having a more sustainable approach. Patagonia, you're probably very familiar with, even closed their doors of the shops during the global climate strikes to allow their own employees to participate in the strikes. But they also exceptionally paid for advertising in the subway, in cities, to actually, with quotes of young people, to move people into participating in the climate strike. And Patagonia is not the only brand. Other brands, Seventh Generation, B Corp certified brand, part of the Unilever group, which is also really about sustainable products, did a campaign as well in 2020, using footage from an old State of the Union showing Franklin D. Roosevelt just before, back then, Donald Trump would do his State of the Union, and then campaigning about, let's also think about the next generation that will still have to live on this planet. So coming back to this poll, if you just jumped into this call or meeting, you can still participate in the interactive poll we're having. In order to do that, you have to scan the QR code on top of the screen, or you can use the URL, scan it with your camera app, of course, or use the URL directly in your browser, pollf.com/Joeri. As you can see, we have some results of people, and most of you are feeling good in the green part of this graph, so that's already good. I hope it will be the same at the end of this presentation as well. Let's go back to the stats, and what we can see is that three quarters of the US consumers find sustainability important to very important. Again, these are stats coming from our very recent study we just finished a couple of weeks ago. But you can also see that it's even a bit higher when we look at the generation of millennials or Generation Y, where it's 8 out of 10, so a significant higher amount of millennials say that sustainability is important in the US. When we asked them, is climate change an important issue to you, 6 out of 10 answered yes, fully agree with that. And almost the same amount said it's even as serious as COVID-19. So that's often a question I get in the Q&A, so it's one you can skip at the end. Has it changed because of COVID-19? There are some things that are changed, and I will come back to them later in this presentation. But the concern and the importance of sustainability is certainly not lowered by the COVID-19 crisis. On the contrary, there are, in fact, in total, 40% of the US consumers who say COVID-19 is a direct consequence of an ecological disbalance. So they even link it to the environment and to sustainability in the end. And of course, it is as important as COVID-19 because when we have a look at the overshoot day, Earth Overshoot Day, maybe you're familiar with that day. It's the day on which we have used up all the planet's resources. So the day that we're actually destructing the planet by deforestation, for instance. You can see that in the past year, in 2021, Earth Overshoot Day, or Country Overshoot Day of the US was already on March 14. So actually after 2 months and a half, the US has used all the resources they need to cater to all the needs of people living in the US. And you see, it's not an Olympic flag. You see 5 planets over there to the right. It actually means that if everyone on Earth would live in the same way as Americans are doing, we would need 5 planets to cater for all the needs of humans instead of the 1 planet we actually have. So of course, that means that the old definition of sustainability, which was we should try to do less harm to our planet, that's a bit, it's not enough. And it's a bit an old school definition. And this definition comes from the classical model, you could say, used in sustainability, which is called the triple bottom line. It was launched by a CSR expert, John Elkington, 27 years ago. And he said, what is sustainability? What is sustainable? It's actually doing not only better for your profits as a company, but also for the planet and for the people. And you could say, yeah, that is the definition of sustainability. I mean, what's wrong with it? But John Elkington himself, 25 years after launching this model and setting the standard for many companies, he recalled his own model as a thought leader, which is something that is not usually done by thought leaders. Some car makes are recalling certain models because the brakes are not working, for instance. But a thought leader who says, you know what, my model 25 years ago, it's wrong. It's something unusual. What John said, he said, the fact that we're thinking of it should be better on all aspects has actually given companies an alibi not to invest, not to innovate in things that in the short term will not lead to immediate profits. So it actually, it put a hurdle on innovations and on becoming more ecologically sound. So I said, listen, I'm sorry guys, but my own model on sustainability, it's a wrong model. And of course, he said it when he was introducing a new book that he wrote, Green Swans, which is about a new concept, and it's the concept of regeneration. And he calls it green swans, and you can make the link with the black swans, you know. But it's all about restoring, replenishing and recovering what we have lost in the past decades in the end. And to do that, he says, we need green swans. And green swans are innovations, are companies who are rethinking the way they create products, but also rethinking the way they are transporting it, their systems, but also we should rethink how we are living today. And also there should be a bigger collaboration between brands and more open source thinking, because every company has the same problems when it comes to sustainability. They all have CO2 emissions, and instead of all trying to find better ways to lower the CO2 impact or the environmental impact, we should work together more, even if we are competitors. One example of this green swan thinking is the Loop project, which is a project of TerraCycle in combination with UPS and 25 multinationals. And what they're doing is they're using durable, reusable containers instead of plastic packaging, and a pickup at your home to offer the convenience as well with UPS. And we see competitors, head-on competitors like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, working together. And also in the US recently, after some test projects in Europe with Carrefour and Tesco, and in Japan, they're working together with Kroger, Walgreens and Burger King in the United States to see if this milkman, old school milkman model would work for their brands and products as well. So this is about climate plus thinking, about adding things to the planet instead of taking only resources from the planet. And again, in our research recently done in the US, we see that 6 out of 10 Americans say, I'm very concerned about wasting of natural resources, which is one of the top concerns when it comes to sustainability. So climate plus thinking and regenerative thinking will become more important in the next couple of years. This is an example from Europe, from Denmark, and as you know, Scandinavia within Europe is the most progressive area when it comes to sustainable thinking, but also equality and diversity, also parts of sustainability. And it's a business park actually, Kalundborg Symbiosis in Denmark, which has 9 different businesses that are working together to in a completely circular system to use each other's waste and surplus materials and energy to create something that is carbon negative instead of just carbon neutral. So actually adding climate plus thinking becomes more important. If you're interested in this regenerative thinking, I can suggest 2 very interesting books on the topic. It's Regenerative Leadership on the left side of this slide, sorry. But also the very new book of Paul Polman, and some of you might know Paul as the ex-CEO of Unilever, who is really one of the ambassadors, and also he was already an ambassador of sustainability at Unilever, but today he became like a thought leader on net positive thinking, so giving more to the planet than taking from the planet. It's quite a new book, and I can really recommend it. Some examples of this climate plus thinking. An example from the US, a farmer, actually Travis Potter in Ohio, started his own beverage company using only natural ingredients to create a natural soft drink, but also using regenerative agriculture to create the ingredients he needs for this soft drink. So he's kind of rethinking the whole soft drink category, not using chemicals, only natural products, and all farmed in regenerative farming. Another example is Interface. I'm sure you're familiar with this market leader in carpet tiles. And Interface actually moved from reducing environmental impact, so the triple bottom line model of John Elkington, you could say, to envisioning a new way, which they call FAF. It's a bit like SAS, but FAF stands for factory as a forest. So I think it's not because we produce something that we should only take resources from the planet and emit CO2. You can also think of a factory as a forest and think of how nature is working and regenerating itself. And it's the base for their circular economy of Interface, which will lead to net positivity for the company as well. This is the brand new headquarters, by the way, in Atlanta. And one of the things they have in the basement is they are collecting rainwater and then filtering it to reuse the rainwater as water within the company. It's just one example of the many things they're doing. This is in the office, but also in their factory, in their circular thinking. So sustainability in 2021, we already talked about how it's evolving from the triple bottom line thinking and doing less harm to the planet to becoming regenerative and adding positive things, recreating the planet, reviving the planet in the end. But let's go back to our study. One of the things we asked in our study was an open-ended question where we asked US consumers, if we say sustainability to you, what does it mean to you? And so they could answer whatever they liked in an open-ended question. And in the poll, you will see in which you can still participate by scanning the QR code on top of the page or going to the URL directly on top of the slide. You can actually add words that to you mean sustainability, or even better, in your head would be the answer that consumers in the US would give when they were talking about sustainability. You can already see the first answers coming in, so being eco-friendly, recycling, low emission, eco as a synonym for sustainability. So keep answering these in the app, on the website, and we will come back to them later on. So the question in this poll is, what do you think US consumers understand by sustainability? What is the meaning of sustainability to them? So before we did this quant study, we also did some qual, and as you can see, qual often leads to very complicated slides with a lot of text on it. But to summarize the conclusion of this slide, what we saw in the heads of consumers is that they're confused. They're confused when they think about sustainability. And what we recognized is that they often think that something that is fair trade is also produced in a sustainable way, which isn't necessarily the case, because of course fair trade to the left of this slide, it's all about well-being of people, fair wages. So it's better for society, better for them, better socially, whereas sustainability is really about creating something with reducing ingredients, reducing CO2 emissions, reducing water usage, packaging, transport, but also recycling, so more the environmental responsibility. We also saw that some of them say, okay, to me, organic is the same as sustainability. And for instance, when they see certain organic vegetables packaged in plastics, it kind of conflicts in their heads, because plastics to them are not really sustainable. They want to buy organic vegetables or fruit, and it's packaged in plastics because maybe it will keep them fresh for a longer of time. But to them, it doesn't make sense, because they want to buy something sustainable and organic as well. So as you can see, it's one holistic concept to them. Now, to explain you what brands can do actually in this whole clutter of different notions about sustainability, I will use an example coming from a category that has been proven to be really crucial to humankind. If you remember at the start of the lockdowns and the COVID pandemic, we were all hamstering toilet paper. So it's an example of toilet paper, and it's a direct-to-consumer brand called Who Gives a Crap, which is a premium brand of toilet paper. It's also a sustainable brand of toilet paper, because they're using recycled paper coming from managed forests. So as you can see, it's a B Corp certified company. And they actually are using the three parts of the previous complicated slides in their communication as well. They say it's good for the world, which was at the middle of my slides. It's environmental responsible. It's good for people to the left of the previous slide, which is about the social dimension. And it's good for you. It's good for your bum. There's no chemicals. There's no inks. There's no scents. So it's better for me as well, the third part of sustainability. Now, if we look at these different claims, the main differentiator for this brand is good for people. Why? Because they're giving half half, 50% of all their profits to build toilets for people who don't have access to clean toilets in Asia, in other developing markets. And they actually claim that there's less people having access to clean toilets than there's people having access to a smartphone. So to them, it's the key of their sustainability strategy, and it's clearly a differentiator. There's not so many brands saying, oh, we donate half of our profits to build clean toilets. Whereas being good for the world, being B Corp certified, using FSC certified paper, for instance, you can see it as a defensive shield. Other players in the market are using the same claims, and even we don't use chemicals, we don't use ink, it's scentless. In some markets, this will also be like a Me Too statement, whereas in other markets, it could be a differentiator from competition. So basically, that's the two brand strategies you have when you are branding around sustainability. It's either you have to do it because it becomes the norm in your industry, your main competitors are doing it, so it becomes a defensive shield. You would lose business if you're not investing in certain areas. Or, no, we're better, we have strengths in that area, and we differentiate ourselves from that competition, which is the case for the toilet paper brand when it comes to the charity that they're actually investing in. Let's have a look back at the results, and as you can see, they're still coming in, which allows me to take a sip of my drink. And the number one answer in the word cloud, as you can see, is green. So to you, actually, the US consumer synonym for sustainability in an open-ended question would be green. You can also see that recycling is one of the top answers, and carbon emissions probably is also used a lot. Neutrality, footprint, pro-planet is also some of the answers that you were giving. Let's have a look at the results. And those who said recycling, they were spot on, because it's the top of mind association that US consumers have with sustainability. As you can see, number two is everything has to do with restoring nature. And then it's about reducing food waste specifically and reducing water usage. So these are the top of mind answers on the open-end questions in the US. You can see that dirty little virus over there that I put next to work-life balance, which was quite high, and also compared to the European results, which came in 1 year earlier. I think that's a direct result of the way that we have been re-evaluating our careers during lockdowns and during the COVID crisis. So it made work-life balance higher on the agenda for many people, which can be seen on this open-ended question as well. Restoring nature, we also had this aided question, a statement where we asked, did it make you revalue nature and clean air? And almost 6 out of 10 Americans says, yes, I agree, COVID-19 made me revalue nature because it brings rest, it brings mental health, but also when all the stores or restaurants are closed, it's the only place where we can still go for a walk or a hike. But recycling is the number one top of mind answer. And of course, many brands are investing in putting recycling systems into place. An example of Nestlé's Nespresso that is incentivizing people to not just throw away their capsules, used capsules, but to recycle them. They have 88,000 UPS drop-off points where you can put your bag of used Nespresso capsules. And then they did this campaign in which they used 300,000 of the purple arpeggio capsules to create bikes. The bike you can see on the slide is created, upcycled, you could say, from the arpeggio capsules. So recycling programs, it's important. I will come back to that later on. Reducing food waste was rather high as well. What we increasingly see is efforts that retailers are doing to reduce food waste, but also restaurants. This is one example from North America where Invisible Smart Labels working together with Innocentia created this label that is guiding you on when to eat the meat or other stuff, fresh stuff that you bought in the shops. And they have three, as you can see, three levels. It's good to eat, you should eat it soon, or do not eat it anymore. And it's a lot more simple than looking at the dates, and we also know that the dates lead to more waste in the end, whereas this is giving you a direction, a priority in your fridge, you could say, to eat the things first that are risking to become obsolete later on. Apart from the open-ended question, we also used a closed list in which we asked our respondents in the US, which of the following ESG-related topics are the most important to you? And I'm combining both graphs to show you that there is a difference between the top-of-mind answer on what is sustainability to you and the aided answer on what is important in sustainability to you. You can see, for instance, that restoring natural resources becomes the number one, and recycling programs the number two. Number three is now fair wages. And then it's reducing food waste, but also some new answers like good labor conditions and animal welfare. Animal welfare was not even in the top 10 top of mind associations, but if we show it in the list, you can see that it's also important to US consumers. They were not thinking about animals when thinking about sustainability. When we present it to them, it becomes more important. What we do see is that restoring and replenishing nature, it still stays on top of the list. So this regenerative thinking and regenerative agriculture becomes more important. Danone, for instance, is investing since 2017 in agriculture, regenerative agriculture, with three main pillars: protecting the soil, but also empowering farmers and promoting animal welfare, which is actually tapping very nicely into the things that are important to US consumers as well. One example from the US is this Horizon Farms. It's an organic farm, well, not one farm, 7 farms in 5 states in the US. The idea and the main goal is to become carbon positive by 2025, not just for the farm, but for the entire supply chain in the end. Another US example, or it's a US brand, but of course it's a global brand, is HP, Hewlett-Packard, which is not only working on recycling programs of their inkjets, they're really working on it as a customer. You've probably seen it, that it's easy, again, with UPS to deliver the used toners, but they're also using or reusing plastics, reducing their CO2 emissions and working on labor and fair wages as well. So one of the ways that they're doing it is by investing in ocean plastic collecting in Haiti, and then using the ocean plastics to create the toners that you're buying, but also to create laptops. For instance, this HP Light Dragonfly is made from 80% recycled ocean plastics, which they're collecting with their own initiative in Haiti, for which they're not only collecting the bottles from the ocean, but also giving jobs to, by now, 1,100 collectors in Haiti. And with the extra investments that they're doing, by next year, it will be 2,100 jobs that they're creating to collect ocean plastics and then use it in their own products as well. So HP is one of the examples of a net positive company striving to become net positive. One last point on the definition of sustainability is the importance of equality and diversity, which we didn't really see it in the top 10 that I shared with you today. But if we only look into the Gen Z results, we can see that it's much more important for this young generation. So those who are not 25 yet, younger than 25, as you can see, 20%, 1 out of 5 of Gen Zers in the US says this is a main ESG concern to me. And if you compare it to the baby boomer population in the US, 55 plus, only 5% says it's a main concern. So you can see that the definition of sustainability, it's evolving, it's different for different generations, and it's changing as well. The same for gender equality. Again, you see the difference between the young generation and the older generation, which means that we're not only thinking about plastics, we're not only thinking about nature and the environment, we're also thinking about this social dimension and the social impact as well. This is an example of a Beiersdorf brand, Nivea, which changed not just one of their products, but their main iconic brand, the blue tin of Nivea. They changed it since last year, using the colored flag, the LGBT colored flag. And they are also doing campaigns, as you can see, using the people on this slide that are working for Beiersdorf and that voluntarily are part of the BU at Beiersdorf network, not since last year, but since 2002. So this is almost 20 years that Beiersdorf has been creating this network of diverse people working for Beiersdorf, and now they're also campaigning about it with their products and in their social media. For instance, this year during Pride Festival, they had a 2-day event with celebrity guests like Olivia Jones, famous drag queen Olivia Jones, talking about her authentic story, and also other celebrities were sharing their stories as well during this public broadcasted event of Beiersdorf and Nivea. So summing up this first part, we talked about sustainability. What does it mean for US consumers? It's a holistic concept, so it's better for me, better for society, and better for the planet. And there's two brand strategies. It can be a competitive strength or advantage, or it can be a defensive shield in the end. Let's go to the consumer. So how conscious is the US consumer? One of the results we saw in our study is that more than half of the US consumers in the different age groups are saying, we want to change our own consumption habits to support sustainability. So at least there's the intention to change their habits to live more sustainable in the end. Now, what kind of habits, what kind of sustainable habits do you think the consumers are doing today? So that's the next question in the poll. Again, if you dropped in late, you can scan the QR code on top of the screen to participate in the interactive poll, or go directly to the URL poll.com/Joeri, that's my first name, to participate in this poll. And then there's 3 possible answers, and I can see someone already answered. Which consumer habit do you think is the most popular to become more or to live more sustainable? Is it using up leftovers, limiting water usage at home, or refusing plastic bags in shops when you go shopping? I will come back to the results later on while you're all voting. First, some other facts, and this says European conscious consumer mindset, but that's a typo. I'm very sorry. It should be the American conscious consumer mindset. It's a bit lower than in Europe. In Europe, it's 50% claimed of themselves that they were living sustainably. In US, it's 45%. But again, you see generational differences where the next gen, specifically millennials in the US, almost 6 out of 10 say we are living sustainably. And I can conclude from the results I will show you later on that this is the most sustainable generation in the US, the millennials. Then 52% of Generation Z in the US, compared to only 1/3 of baby boomers claiming for themselves that they're living sustainably. We will come back to what are they doing then to live more sustainably. Another thing we saw in our study is that 7 out of 10 claims to be willing to pay more, depending on for which category, for sustainable alternatives. But on the other hand, in another question, when we asked a statement like we as consumers should not have to pay more for a sustainable alternative, 6 out of 10 says, yes, that's true, we should not have to pay more for sustainable alternatives. So again, there's a conflict, and we call it the aspire-do gap, or the say-do gap, between Yes, I have an intention to live more sustainable. I want to pay extra for more sustainable brands, and the real actions and the real willingness to pay. And we will come back to them later on. First, when we're still voting, let's talk about plastic demon. And for many people, plastics are seen as something bad, whereas it's not necessarily always, when it's recycled in a good way, it's not always the worst solution sustainably or for the planet. On the other hand, we see many brands jumping on that. For instance, Coors Light in Las Vegas in the stadium is offering their drinks in reusable aluminum cups instead of in the plastic ones. And there's of course also Coca-Cola, headquartered in Atlanta, that is really investing in getting rid of single-use plastics. Yeah, I know there's no sound in the video, but this was just a moment of being attentive and looking at the screen without hearing my annoying voice all the time. So this is Coca-Cola that is campaigning globally and now also in the US on using recycled PET in their products. But the question is that really the top concern of consumers in the US? So that's the question again in the poll: which consumer habit is the most popular? Is it refusing plastic bags, for instance, in supermarket, limiting water usage at home, or using up the leftovers at home? Let's have a look at the results up to now. And what we see is that most of you said it's refusing plastic bags in shops. Some of you said it's using up leftovers, and then no one said it's limiting water usage at home. If you want to participate in this interactive poll, you can still do it by scanning the QR code on top of the screen or going to the URL, because there will be some questions later on asking your opinion again. Let's have a look at the US results from our study, very recent results, the November 2021 results. And you can see that the number one answer, the most conscious consumer habit in US homes, is actually using up leftovers. Coming back to our earlier results where we talked about food waste, it clearly is an important topic for US consumers at the moment. Limiting water usage is somewhere in the middle, and then refusing plastic bags in shops, which was the number one in the poll we did, is not in the top 5 among US consumers. And clearly in the US, we still have this double bagging thing when you go shopping to make sure that the bag won't break. So this concern about plastic bags in shops, it's not top of mind, but it's more than 40%. It's not that it's not there as a habit. Some other things that you can see next to this graph is the difference between generations. For instance, not buying water in plastic bottles anymore, which is around 42% among the general population. It's 50% among the youngest generation. Again, looking for ethical logos on packaging when I'm shopping, it is higher. It's 40% on Gen Pop, but it's, when you look at millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z, we see that's 50%, which means that it's lower than 40%, of course, 30% among the older generation. And the same goes for not using fossil fuel cars and wanting to have green and renewable energy. It's lower in total, but it's much higher when we look at the youngest generation. So things are changing in the end. One of the other things we see in the top 10 is rather than consuming extra, we can mend or repair the stuff we bought when it's durables or clothes, or we can just decide to consume less in general and rent, for instance. So these type of new models, and they become more important as well, especially to the youngest generation who are really into buying secondhand, for instance. Many brands are adapting to that. For instance, Taylor Stitch has a take-back program called Restitch, in which you give your old clothes back, they clean them, they repair them, and then they sell them again for a lower price, and you get a discount on the next clothes that you're buying. Selfridges is not only doing this second-hand store, but also repairing and renting clothes. And Philips, for instance, also believes in Second Life and is selling their own refurbished products, so taking back their products, repairing them, and then selling them again, still giving you a guarantee of 2 years on the refurbished products that they are selling. So this model of re-commerce that you can call, it's not only important in the fashion industry and in clothes, it's seen as one of the fastest growing retail businesses. So it's not only the Levi's and the clothing brands, garment brands that are investing in reselling platforms, but it's also other retailers like IKEA, for instance, that are doing buyback programs and offering you money for your old furniture to get the furniture back and then sell them again as a pre-owned furniture. Looking back at the total graph of conscious habits, we see that trying or eating less meat, which to me for a hamburger country didn't really sound like a US habit. It's rather low in the top 20, but still 40% is saying that they are trying to eat less meat in general, which is higher than I had expected myself. And it's an important one because we know that the meat industry and the methane gases from the cows, but also the water that we need to deliver our hamburger and our meat, it has a huge impact on the environment. And actually almost half of the US consumers says, I know that my own eating habits have an influence on the environment. So the knowledge is there. The action, again, is not always there. If you look at the type of diets that US consumers have, there's like 7% vegetarians, 6% vegans, 7% pescatarians who only eat fish, and 9% flexitarians who try to eat less meat and combine meat with veggie or vegan or fish in the end. But in total, it's already 1/5 of the US population that is never eating meat. And of course, there's campaigns like VEGANUARY that are tapping into this. Originally a UK campaign, but they're also reaching the US by saying, why not skip meat or even dairy products for 1 month? It's better for your health, better for me, and it's better for the planet as well. And what they're doing very well in this campaign is that they are showing you the impact, which is one of the main barriers. I will come back to that later on. One of the main barriers that people don't know if they really have an impact on the planet. They're not only showing it in tons of CO2, but also what does it mean? How many flights is that? What does it mean when it comes to swimming pools? How many swimming pools did we not use of water? So visualizing, measuring it, making it really vivid in comparing it with landmarks, for instance, is a good thing to do when it comes to sustainability. Costco in the US actually sent out a mailer in January this year to promote VEGANUARY to over 15 million customers in the US. And there's, of course, the Impossible Whopper at Burger King. We asked US consumers if they had ever tried a plant-based alternative, for meat or for dairy, and you can see that almost 1/3, a bit higher for dairy, has done so. And again, it's higher for the younger generation. And again, this vegan thinking, meatless thinking, is not only important for food products, it is also important for other categories, like for instance, fashion. H&M just recently in November launched a new collection, the Coexist Vegan Collection, which is approved by PETA, which is not using any animal-sourced resource at all in their clothing. And when we're talking about fashion, this is the next question in our poll. What do you think is the world's most sustainable fashion brand? You think fashion or sports brands? You think it's Adidas, and then you pick that in the poll? Or do you think it's Gucci? Then you pick the other results. And again, you can participate by using your Cam app and scanning the QR code, and then you will be directed to this page in the poll. So question again, what's the world's most sustainable fashion or sports brand? Is it Gucci, or do you think it's Adidas? Certainly it's not Nike. And Nike, I'm a big Nike fan myself, and Nike is investing a lot in actually in sustainability with the Move to Zero campaign. They are creating new shoes, new collections like the Space Hippie collection, for instance, using at least 50% of recycled material, factory scraps, to create shoes that are actually upcycled, but definitely not the world's most sustainable fashion brands. Looking back at the results, I think most of you answered Gucci, and it is the good answer. Gucci is the world's most sustainable fashion brand. These are the latest results from the Corporate Knights Global 100, and you can see that the Kering Group, which also has other luxury brands like Balenciaga, is on number 7 in the top 100, whereas Adidas is on number 76. So it's a clear winner, and they use different KPIs. Again, better for me, better for society, and better for the planet. Kering also has this, you can find it on the website, My EPL, My Environmental Profit and Loss. That helps you, even with an app, for each item you buy, whether it's a handbag or a luxury jacket, to see what the environmental impact is of whatever you are buying from the Kering Group. And then we come to the last part of this conscious habits, and it's about paying to offset flights. And you see it's the least used, whereas every airline is offering you that opportunity. About 1/4 claims that they often or always are setting off their flights. But again, this is claimed behavior. I'm not sure it's really the one result. But on the other hand, you see airlines like JetBlue, for instance. JetBlue, since 2020, is the first US carbon neutral airline when it comes to domestic flights. And of course, they are achieving this by offsetting the flights themselves, but also by stimulating you as a customer to offset your own flight, but also by using sustainable aviation fuel, biofuels made from food waste, actually, mixed with other fuels to fly on domestic flight with more environmental friendly flights. For instance, every outgoing flight in the San Francisco airport from JetBlue is using biofuel, is using this sustainable aviation fuel. So what are the main barriers? What can you do as a brand to create more sustainable habits with consumers? And we asked US consumers on their main barriers to live more sustainable. Because again, 45% says I'm living sustainable. So we asked the 55%, why not? And in the results, you see that the majority says either it's too expensive, it costs more, or it's not easy to get, I don't know where to find sustainable alternatives, or education, I don't know which products or brands are sustainable, or I forget it. and it's not convenient at all. So these are the main barriers in the end. So you can work on that. Affordability, for instance, a Unilever brand did this in Europe. They created small refills of their brands that you can dilute yourself at home, which is not only saving plastics, and it's rPET, like the Coca-Cola example, recycled plastics, but also saving transportation, saving space in the trucks, so saving trucks, saving CO2 emissions in the end, and saving you money as a consumer, as well as the refill is much cheaper than the full large bottle of this household cleaning product. So yes, you can work on affordability. Convenience, again, is one of the main barriers. And one of the convenient or inconvenient truths about sustainable things is you have to go to other stores to find a sustainable alternative, which is something that Blue Land is working on in the cleaning and laundry category as well, by home delivery of tablets that you dilute yourself in the US as well. Giving more convenience and ease and also affordability are apps like Food for All. Food for All originally launched in Boston. It's now available in more than 200 restaurants, also in New York. It's an app that allows you to see near you, location-based, where you can find a good deal, up to 80% discounts for surplus foods that actually the retailer or the restaurant wants to sell you instead of throwing it away. So it's convenient because the app shows you where to find. It's affordable because you get a discount, and it's a good response to saving food from getting wasted. Another example of convenience and ease is what H&M, fashion retailer, did in the US, working together with Lyft. So H&M has been working for many years on returning your old clothes and giving you discounts. But they said one barrier is you still have to go with your bag to the store. So what if we would offer to our US consumers the opportunity to have a free lift, a free ride with your bag to our stores? We will pay the ride for you. Again, working on affordability, but also on the convenience and ease in the end. Then reminding and rewarding. Dove Unilever brand. This is a Grand Central. You can recognize the Grand Central Station in New York, where they introduced their rPET, 100% rPET bottle. And the way to get a sample of the rPET bottle was you had to throw away a non-recycled plastic bottle in the vending machine, and you would get that. You would then get a sample or a free Dove 100% recycled bottle in the end, reminding you of recycling, but also rewarding you. I'm losing my voice a bit. And then the last part is educating. Many people don't know how they can live more sustainable. So it's an opportunity for brands to work on that. And Google, for instance, which we also saw in our results from the US, is one of the top-rated brands when it comes to sustainability, is working together with the California Academy of Sciences to create this program on helping you to reduce food waste, water waste, and energy waste, and becoming more circular. So you can find these free courses online, and Google is working together there. Sorry. So this second part was about conscious mindset. We see that there is a say-do gap or an aspire-do gap. There's a difference between mindset and habits. Convenience is the main enemy of sustainability. So it's not only what you say on sustainability as a brand, but also how you say it, which means we should reward people to live more sustainable, to buy more sustainable alternatives, but also educate them and remind them. And we discussed a number of ways to actually sell sustainable options, not just because it's better for the planet, but also because it works on the barriers of buying sustainable or living more sustainably. And then we come to the last part. And the last part is about why do we have to invest in sustainable business? Well, it is a good business in the end. In our research results, we see that 46% of US consumers say that sustainable brands have a higher quality. So there's a perception of higher quality with sustainability claims, and an even higher perception of being innovative and up-to-date, 53% agrees, and 65, not less than 65%, says, I feel more positive about a company that makes efforts to reduce its carbon footprint in the end. If you don't believe these results from a consumer survey, there's also other data based on Nielsen data. This is NYU Stern, the Center for Sustainable Business, that shows you the difference in market share index between 2015 and 2019 within each category between those who were marketing a sustainability claim and those who were not using sustainability claims. And you can see that 9 out of 10 of each of the product categories, the growth of the ones who were using sustainability claims was much higher than those who were not doing anything about sustainability. And again, this is not a survey, this is based on real checkout, real sales data coming from Nielsen. So there are benefits of branding on sustainability. The first being creating a preference, that's clear. I mean, the NYU Stern data clearly show it. It can also lead to creating more awareness about your brands. Tony Chocolonely, for instance, is disrupting the chocolate business also in the US by offering 100% slave-free chocolates and by challenging the rest of the industry to do the same. So to them, it's a clear differentiator. It's their reason to exist in the end. And again, from Nielsen data, you see that although the total chocolate market is still growing, because whenever we're in a crisis, we eat more chocolate, right? So it's still growing. But you see that those brands who are using claims, whether it's better for the planet, environmental claims, better for you, no artificial ingredients, or better for society, which is what Tony Chocolonely is doing, is growing a lot faster than those who are not using any sustainability claims at all. So it's clear it leads to more awareness and it can lead to more preference. Of course, another good reason is it gives you a license to operate as a brand. 1 out of 5 Americans have boycotted a brand for sustainability reasons. And again, it's higher with the young generations, only 5% of baby boomers, but of the young generation, it's almost 3 out of 10 of those younger than 40 that have boycotted a brand because it was not sustainable. So it's not just because certain NGOs will attack your brand if you're not aware of sustainability, and it will give you negative press. But also because people will boycott you. We also asked those who were boycotting in the US why they were boycotting a certain brand. And again, you see that the social things like good labor conditions, gender equality, fair wages, but also animal welfare are higher on the list than the environmental topics. Of course, there's also no recycling, for instance, but you see no reducing of food waste. But you see the more social dimensions, the human dimensions, are more important when it comes to boycotting. Sorry. A third reason to invest in sustainable branding is it leads to new innovations and it can lead to developing new markets as well. And a good example from the US is 7-Eleven, which is normally a quick stop for drivers that is investing also in quick recharging stations for electric vehicles in the US and in North America, because they see the link between recharging your car, having a quick stop, and also buying some quick FMCG goods in their stores as well. So it can lead to developing a new markets or reaching new target groups, especially younger target groups as well. And then the last reason is employee engagement, of course, because there's also this fight going on the job market. It's getting harder and harder, especially after COVID crisis, to find young people to work for you. And one of the main things why millennials and Gen Z want to work for their employer is purpose and a broader meaning. Certain employers like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, they also already saw this, how this extrovert young generation is speaking up and actually working out of the office to participate in climate strikes. So it becomes more important as an employer brand and as an employer as well. And of course, it's also important to communicate about your sustainability plans. If people don't know that you're doing it, 7 out of 10 says, if a brand is not talking about sustainability, they are not doing it. So start to communicate about your sustainability plans. And many brands are not doing that. They're waiting because they think, okay, we are not CO2 neutral yet. We still have plastics in our packaging. So we have to wait until we're 100% sustainable. But if you do that, then you have to wait for the next 10 years at least. So you're losing a lot of opportunities. You can already start talking about what you're doing today and also talking about your commitments, like Volvo, for instance, is doing. Volvo is going fully for electrification of their car park, of course, but they're also thinking about the way that the cars are produced, and they're using recycled plastics in the interior of cars, for instance. And you see the timeline at the bottom of the slide that talks about the different steps that they're taking throughout this campaign. By 2030, which is still 9 years, the plan is to have every new Volvo to be purely electric, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing something today. So talk about tomorrow, but also talk about today, and link it to your own USP, which for Volvo clearly is safety. And as you might have seen in the latest campaign, they say the ultimate safety test is actually what are we doing for climate change? And that's where they talked about becoming all electric in the end, linking it again to their USP of their own brand. Now, one thing you shouldn't do is only talk about a long-term commitment, because the main frustration we see with consumers in our research is this one: brands talk too much about tomorrow, but not about what they're doing today. So also talk about what you're doing today and try to link tomorrow with today as well, which is something, for instance, that the new beer company, the Belgian beer company, New Belgian beer company has done with their flagship beer, Fat Tire, an amber ale beer, together with some retailers that did this campaign in which they said, this 6-pack will cost $100 in a number of years because of climate change, because agriculture becomes more difficult, ingredients will become more expensive, and if we're not changing anything, this 6-pack that you're buying today will cost you $100. Do you want that? Or do you want to work together with us on this becoming more sustainable? Fat Tire was the first certified carbon neutral beer in the US as well. Now, one thing is important as well, and it's your tone of voice. And my tone of voice, not so good for the moment, so I apologize for that. It's about being transparent, and it's one thing that Unilever really understands. Whenever Unilever is communicating about their sustainable brands, they're always saying, and it's of course also to other stakeholders like shareholders, listen, we are not only doing this to create a better planet, but also to create more sales. And you can even see in the press releases, the first bullet point, when they talked about going more into plant-based products, was not about the planet. It was about reaching a sales target of 1 billion euros from plant-based meat and dairy alternatives within 5 to 7 years. And then they talked about food waste. Then they talked about positive nutrition, better for you, lower calories, etc., etc. But also clearly, it's linked to the business as well. Why is this important? Because we still live in a post-greenwash age, and many consumers feel a bit like this dog. They say, well, in our US results again, 50% says, I trust brands and companies that claim to be sustainable, which means half of the consumers do not really trust it. They think it's a gimmick, it's a marketing campaign. And especially, again, the oldest generation are very skeptical about this. How can we create more trust? By creating more transparency, which is also what a US consumer says. 64% says brands should become more transparent, provide additional information on how they are creating a better planet, how they are more sustainable than other brands. And it's one of the main worries is how can we track it? How can we check it? How can we trace the sustainability of what we're buying? Because there's so many different eco labels that brands are using, more than 460, with frogs, with plants, all types of labels that are used and claims that are used on packaging. So they're also asking for more clear ways of checking sustainability. For instance, this farm, these Vital Farms, on their eggs, you can actually scan your eggs and see videos of where the chicks are actually creating the eggs and see the farm conditions, the animal welfare of the eggs that you really bought. My last question before I die, and my voice is dying, is all about what are people checking on their packaging. So which ingredients or which labels do you think people check the most on grocery packaging? And you have a number of options there. It's the provenance, it's the number of carbs, the calories, whether they use a label like natural, or how many sugar is inside the product. So you can still vote by scanning with your CAM app the QR code on this question: which ingredients do you think consumers are checking the most on their packs when they buy groceries? We call it flip side shopping. And again, consumers are actively asking to have more reliable and accessible certified ways to evaluate brands' sustainability. 68% would agree on that. Some brands like Heinz, for instance, have already worked on it. In Brazil, they changed their brand distinctive assets, so the label on front of the packaging instead of flip side shopping, the front of the packaging with just stating the natural ingredients that are inside the Heinz ketchup, which are all natural. So allowing consumers to immediately see the ingredients without flipping the packaging, you could say. So the results of the survey, of the interactive survey, is most of you say calorie counts. Then there's also people saying carbs. Yeah, you can still change the answers if you like, if you see the results. Number two, at this moment at least, is the carbohydrates and sugar. No one says natural anymore at this moment. And 13% is referring to provenance. So keep voting and we see the result in the end. But you can also check what the US consumer said, and the number one was actually sugar. Sugar is checked the most. Number two is salt. Number three, an ex aequo between natural and calorie count. And you can see that the provenance is a bit lower. Again, there are some differences between generations with sugar, salt, but also artificial ingredients, GMO ingredients being more important to baby boomers. For millennials, a label like natural and organic is more important. So again, you see the millennial generation in the US is the one that is most prone actually to buy more sustainable alternatives. But number one for the total generation is getting rid of sugars, or at least having less sugars, which is the reason that companies like Mars are investing in new recipes that have less sugar in their range, or to offer portion controlled alternatives to this indulgence that you might experience when consuming one of their brands as well. Again, provenance, more important to baby boomers. It's not in the top three, you could say, but it's still important to the US consumers. And it's not terrorism, we call it terroirism, referring to the French terroir. Normally, a terroir for wine is a quality mark, but it becomes more important for other categories as well. This buying local instead of global, it's a sustainable act, you could say as well. And Local Slide, for instance, as a beer brand, is really focusing on this local aspect, also by giving back to local restaurants during the pandemic crisis. And then the last part, before we dive into the Q&A, Thomas, it's all about keeping your brand's tone of voice. That's quite important, because too often we see that when brands communicate about sustainability, they're either doing it not via the marketing department, but via the PR corporate department, only publishing it on LinkedIn, not on other social media, or not in their above the line campaigns, you could say, or in store, which gives a negative feeling to the employees working for you when suddenly the PR department takes over or the CEO takes over. You can question yourself, is this really our core business? Because we're not using it in our marketing. And also to consumers, when it's a different tone of voice than your normal marketing campaigns, they could see that, oh, but this is not really the brand that I know talking to me, so probably it's just greenwashing. So that's the negative aspect of using different departments and different tone of voice and approaches to communicating about sustainability. A brand that really understands part of ABI is Corona. Corona, long before sustainability became a hype, if you want to call it like that, it's not a hype, but became a consumer trend. They were already investing in everything that's related to oceans, to keeping the beaches clean, working together with Parley for the Oceans long before Adidas, for instance, worked together with Parley for the Oceans. They were organizing worldwide, globally, beach cleanups as a brand, because the brand Corona is so linked to beach life and summer that there is a clear link. They did these campaigns in which they were using their own packaging and the distinctive asset in Mexico, for instance, to highlight where the blue was lower, that there were some beaches that were more polluted, which led to 30% increase in the number of people participating in cleaning up the beaches together with them. So they've been very active in doing this, even organizing beach events, music events to young people, and they reached 300,000 young people around the world, like in South Africa, with these events, with DJs and music, but not using plastics, cleaning the beach afterwards, and also giving the word to climate ambassadors like Greta Thunberg and climate activists, giving workshops on how to live more sustainable during their events as well, but keeping their tone of voice of the brand in the end. So this last part was about what are the benefits of sustainable branding. Not communicating is not a good idea, because then you communicate to consumers you're not sustainable. And there are four golden rules if you do communicate about sustainability. So of course we should invest in sustainable branding, not only because we won't make Greta mad, but it's also a good business in the end. Thanks so much for your time. Sorry a bit about my voice, going better now. We will immediately have a look at your questions that you can still raise by using the chat function. And before I dive into the Q&A, I give the word back to Thomas.
Wow, thank you so much, Joeri. What an amazing set of inspiration and case studies and guidelines. So indeed, if you have any questions for Joeri, feel free to submit them. Question pane on the right. And as you're writing them up, I want to take a few minutes to share a few case studies showcasing our vision on working with the right consumers for the right task. And here you kind of see a little bit of an overview there. Depending on goals, we're working with what we refer to as the 90, the 9, or the 1%. The 90%, your mainstream everyday consumer, great to immerse in their world, but also to get feedback on specific ideas or concepts. Then there's a 9%, our leading edge, more trend savvy group of consumers who are great to uncover emerging trends or optimize solutions. And we have a network of those in our Illume network. And then the third group of people are our creatives, the 1%, a group of people who are great at coming up with solutions to the challenges we are putting in front of them. And we have a few case studies to just show within the context of conscious consumption of how we're working with these different audiences. La Roche-Posay here on slide is actually one of my personal love brands. Their line for acne and oily skin, I think, saved my life when I was a teenager, and I've been loyal ever since. And it's great to see them also reduce the plastic in their packaging, as in this example. So what you're seeing here is the first cosmetic tube incorporating cardboard instead of just plastic in the packaging, and then reducing the amount of plastic with 45%. And we collaborated with L'Oreal to understand towards consumers if they're getting that message and how it would be welcomed by their target group. So we use the ongoing communities we're working on with L'Oreal to truly understand this on how to further navigate this. A great example, I think, of how we're working with the 90% for consumer feedback. Another example is more touching on our 9% of leading edge consumers in our Illume network. And this is an example for Bosch. Bosch is a leading global supplier of technology and services, and they want to create technology that is invented for life. And living up to this purpose, they decided to play a pioneering role in climate change. And the challenge they were facing is that it can be really difficult to understand consumer perceptions and understanding of sustainability because there's so many complicated overlapping needs and emotions. So that's where we came in, and we set up a collaboration with the 9%, our Illume guide of trend-savvy consumers, and did a deep dive with these consumers to understand the nuances of this sustainability debate. And this resulted in a framework, and you see a snapshot of that here, a framework to explore and measure sustainability among mainstream consumers. So we started with the 9% to establish the framework, and then we measured it and explored it further with the 90% of our more mainstream consumers. And then the last example here, real quick, is putting our creative consumers front and center stage. And in the past months, we've really done a wide range of crowdsourcing challenges on the topic of sustainability, from helping our clients on getting more sustainable ingredients in their products to packaging innovation and also communication. And this is an example we can publicly share, and I think it's a fun one. So the Federation of Glass Packaging wanted to develop a new hallmark to emphasize their sustainability goal. And they worked both with a creative agency, let's say the more traditional way, to come up with new hallmark ideas. And they also threw this challenge in front of our ICA community. And in just 12 days, our community generated 130 ideas coming from 38 different countries. And in the next step, they put all of these ideas, both from the ICA community and from the creative agency, in front of the 90%, the more mainstream consumer, to evaluate them. And of course, we're proud that the winning hallmark that you see here in some of the assets came from the ICA community. And this is something they, in the meanwhile, have trademarked and have also launched about a year ago. So those were just a few examples to see how we're also bringing that to life in our everyday work. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Joeri, thank you so much for sharing this Conscious Consumption US edition with us today. If anyone would have any further questions later on, feel free to email Joeri or myself directly. As mentioned in the beginning, we will be following up in the coming days with a recording of the session as well. So if we don't speak before, the only thing I can still say is happy holidays and speak soon.